Okay, let's unpack this. We're starting today's deep dive with a story that, honestly, if you saw it in a movie script, you'd probably dismiss it. You'd say it's just, too far-fetched.
Right. It's pure fiction territory.
Exactly. It's this massive secret operation coordinated globally that managed to turn the criminal underworld's most trusted, supposedly bulletproof communication systems
They're digital fortresses.
into basically live listening devices for the FBI and international police.
And this is, it's a landmark moment. For decades, organized crime has thrived in these digital shadows. These hardened, encrypted devices, they gave them a level of security they'd never had before.
A truly secure fortress.
And what we're looking at today is how that fortress wasn't just breached. In one case, it was actually built by law enforcement from the ground up to be a honeypot.
So our mission today is, well, it's multi-layered. First, we really need to get our heads around the sheer scale of the threat. This thing called serious and organized crime, SOC. It's evolved into something different. Polycriminal, even state proxied.
And then second, we'll get into the anatomy of these two just unprecedented sting operations, the infiltration of EncroChat and then the creation of ANOM, or Trojan Shield as it was called.
And finally, we'll look forward, because the success of these operations, it revealed just how systemic this whole threat is.
Right, which led to these urgent calls for a fundamental, an international reset. We're going to look at a proposal for an international SOC alliance, which isn't just about arrests, it's about systemic economic and technical disruption.
This is a covert global war being fought in the digital world, and we need to understand what that actually means. Okay, so before we get into the spy novel stuff, we have to grasp the sheer gravity of the problem, why these extreme measures were even necessary in the first place.
That's the perfect place to start, because the picture our sources paint of serious and organized crime is fundamentally different from the old mafia movies.
Right.
The key thing to understand is that this threat is continuous. It's resilient. And, crucially, it's evolving so fast in scale and shape and sophistication.
And law enforcement is struggling to keep up.
They're fighting a linear battle. Investigate a crime, make an arrest. But the enemy operates exponentially. The response mechanisms are often described as sort of dated and fragmented, chasing the symptoms while the actual criminal system just keeps thriving.
The economic impact of this shadow economy is just staggering. The figures, they rival the budgets of entire countries. We're talking about an estimated $3.1 trillion in illicit funds moving through the global financial system.
Just in 2023.
In 1 year.
And to put that number, that $3.1 trillion, into some context, that's roughly the size of the entire gross domestic product of a major developed nation. Think the UK or India.
Wow.
So this isn't just, street crime. That kind of money distorts entire markets, it funds corruption at the highest levels, and it fundamentally undermines legitimate economies everywhere. They operate like shadow multinational corporations.
And when you break down that huge number, the human cost just becomes crystal clear. Drug trafficking alone, that accounted for over $782 billion.
An incredible figure.
And even more chilling, human trafficking generated more than $346 billion. These aren't just numbers on a page. They represent ruined lives, systemic corruption, all fueled by this enormous liquid wealth.
And it's not a static problem. It's accelerating. Our sources have hard data from 2013 to 2022 that just shows this explosion.
Like what?
Well, take the number of detected human trafficking victims. Over that decade, it soared by a shocking 292%.
Nearly tripled in just 10 years. That speaks volumes. It shows that criminal ambition is growing, and maybe detection is getting better, but it's still completely overwhelmed.
And it's not just that. The digital world is booming for them, too. Cyber fraud cases went up 142%. And even the traditional stuff, drug seizures, grew by 172%.
So they're diversifying into digital crime while at the same time scaling up their physical operations.
Exactly. And that's possible because the very nature of an OCG, an organized criminal group, has changed. They're not, defined by a neighborhood or loyalty to one boss anymore.
So what are they now?
They're what we call polycriminal. They're not just a drug cartel or just a human trafficking ring. They're involved in multiple illicit streams at the same time, often using the exact same networks and logistics.
And they're borderless?
Borderless, decentralized, digitally enabled, and incredibly resilient. You take down one cell, and 3 more can spin up somewhere else because the underlying digital infrastructure is still there.
And this brings us to what I think is the biggest challenge for law enforcement. These groups, they rely on legitimate systems. They're not hiding in caves.
Not at all. They're using our container ships, our major ports, global financial networks, anonymous shell companies, commercially available software. They're woven into the global supply chain.
Which makes fighting them impossible without deep, deep partnership with the private sector.
Think about it. A criminal group today, they need reliable, fast logistics just like Amazon does. They need secure financial transfers just like a bank. They're just mirroring successful businesses. They just innovate faster and their product is illegal.
But this is where it gets really unsettling. The line between a purely criminal enterprise and, well, state power is starting to blur.
A major geopolitical shift.
We're seeing hostile states using these criminal networks as proxies for strategic and financial gain.
And it gives them perfect deniability while they fund their operations or weaken their adversaries. Our sources point to some really compelling examples of this hybrid threat. Take APT4.
A cyber group.
Explicitly linked to the Chinese state. And what's fascinating is they don't just do one thing. They conduct state-sponsored cyber espionage, gathering intelligence.
Right.
But at the same time, they're engaged in financially motivated hacking. So they use these state-level tools and access, but the motive can be pure criminal profit. It's a perfect blend.
Another example you mentioned was even more, I guess, overt. It involved recruiting criminals in other countries.
Yes, the Russian Wagner Group, a state-linked military contractor. They went online, specifically on Telegram, and recruited petty criminals in South London.
What were?
To attack a warehouse that was storing humanitarian aid that was destined for Ukraine.
Wow.
Investigators called it and I'm quoting here, a clear example of Russian state-linked groups using British proxies for serious criminal activity. It's an incredibly efficient way for a hostile state to cause chaos without risking any diplomatic fallout.
And the implications are huge, especially for things like ransomware. The National Crime Agency, the NCA, they call ransomware one of the most sophisticated online crimes.
And they note that the biggest threat comes from groups that are, quote, tolerated by and sometimes linked to the Russian state.
That word tolerated is doing a lot of work there.
It's key. The Russian state enables them, either by just not investigating their operations or sometimes by actively supporting them. And when a criminal group have the tacit protection of a sovereign nation, their ability to do massive damage just skyrockets.
And that blending of crime and geopolitics is what demands this systemic international reset we're going to get to. It's a threat that traditional policing just can't handle alone.
And that discussion of state proxies, it brings us right back to the digital world, which is, it's the main stage for a modern SOC. Technology is, without a doubt, the single greatest enabler of organized crime today.
We can't emphasize that enough, right? Even if the crime is physical, like smuggling drugs, it's all coordinated and paid for online.
Every part of it. And this has totally restructured the criminal economy. It's led to the rise of what people call crime as a service.
So like legitimate businesses they can outsource.
Exactly. They don't need to have their own in-house hacker or money laundering expert anymore. They just hire freelance specialists on the dark web for specific jobs.
What kind of jobs?
Crypto tumblers, targeted cyber attacks, complex logistics to get around customs. Anything you can imagine.
And that is terrifying because it lowers the barrier to entry so dramatically. A small group can suddenly have access to world-class criminal tools.
It accelerates the spread and sophistication of crime globally. And the tools they rely on most are encrypted messaging and cryptocurrencies.
Surprisingly, Telegram seems to be the big one.
It's the most dominant app for cyber criminal coordination. We've got figures showing over 80 million unique identifiers linked to illicit channels on Telegram. It's the virtual HQ for global crime.
And for the money, they use crypto to bypass the banks.
Right. Illicit crypto transactions hit almost $41 billion in 2024.
Yeah.
Now, that's just a fraction of the $3.1 trillion total, but it's the fast, untraceable capital they need for operations.
And all this reliance on digital tools led them to seek out systems that they thought were completely 100% secure.
Right. Not consumer apps like Signal or WhatsApp. They're good, but they run on normal infrastructure. Criminals wanted hardened devices, phones stripped of GPS, cameras, microphones, running custom software. They wanted something truly impenetrable.
And that demand created the market for systems like EncroChat.
Let's dive into that. Case study 1, EncroChat. Founded in Europe, 2016, it quickly became the gold standard for organized crime. And these were not cheap. About 1,500 euros for a 6-month contract.
But they promised total secrecy.
A promise that was, implicitly believed. The French gendarmerie estimated 90% of its 60,000 users were criminals. The UK's NCA said they found zero evidence of any legitimate non-criminal users.
So if you had one, you were a serious criminal. It was a club.
A self-selecting user base, absolutely.
So the infiltration Operation Venetic in the UK, this was a huge international effort.
Monumental. The French National Gendarmerie worked with Dutch police and the NCA. And in January 2020, they got a judge in Lille to authorize them to deploy a technical tool, basically malware, onto encrypted's servers in France.
Okay, wait, I want to slow down here. They didn't just watch the traffic. They put malware directly on the central nervous system of this whole criminal network.
That's exactly what they did.
What did that let them do?
The level of access was just fascinating. Starting in April 2020, this tool let the police read millions of messages before they were even encrypted and sent.
So they were reading them in plain text.
Plain text.
Mm-hmm.
Or right after they were decrypted on the receiver's phone. And they could also record the lock screen passwords. They had an undetectable listening post inside the entire system.
The results must have been immediate.
They were. Law enforcement had to act fast to protect the intelligence. It led to just massive arrests all over Europe. By October 2023, you're looking at over 6,500 arrests globally.
And in the UK alone?
Over 3,100 arrests and 1,240 convictions in the UK.
And the physical seizures were just as big.
Staggering. Over 9 tons of Class A drugs, 173 firearms, 54 million pounds in cash, just in the UK. But it's the human impact that really stands out. UK police claim they prevented up to 200 gangland killings based on the plots they were reading in real time.
200 murders prevented. That's a powerful reason for this kind of work. But the intelligence also showed just how horrific these groups were.
Yes. In the Netherlands, the messages led them to this warehouse, and inside they found 7 soundproofed shipping containers, all set up as a torture facility. They called it the treatment room. They found a dentist's chair, scalpels, hedge trimmers, restraints. This was cold, calculated cruelty, all planned out on what they thought was a secure line.
It just shows how confident they were. They were discussing torture logistics, thinking no one could ever see it.
Which brings us to the famous Stilton mistake.
Right. This is a great story.
A perfect cautionary tale. There was a user, Carl Stewart, username ToffeeForce. He sends a photo of his hand holding a block of blue Stilton cheese.
Why would you do that?
Who knows? But the police analyzed the high-res photo, and they were able to lift his fingerprints directly from the image of his hand.
No way.
It led directly to his identification and a 13-and-a-half-year prison sentence. The system he trusted betrayed him because of a piece of cheese.
So encrypted was a successful infiltration, but then law enforcement took it to a whole new level. Case study 2, ANOM. This wasn't an infiltration, it was a honeypot.
It was a strategic pivot. After they took down another provider, Phantom Secure, in 2018, the FBI saw an opening. They recruited a confidential human source, a CHS.
And who was this person?
A high-risk individual who was already developing the next-generation encrypted device for criminals. The FBI basically took over the project, funded it, and turned it into ANOM.
The risk for that CHS must have been off the charts.
Existential. But the FBI's key move was how they distributed it. They didn't sell it themselves. They gave the first devices to 3 former Phantom Secure distributors, people who were already deep in the criminal world, especially in Australia.
So they let criminals market the product to other criminals.
Precisely. The system grew organically because high-profile criminals vouched for it. They said ANOM was totally reliable. And in the first tests, the Australian Federal Police said 100% of the users were engaged in crime. The honeypot was pure.
And the mechanism. The genius of the deception. How did they get the messages?
They built a master key right into the encryption system's architecture, so every single message that was sent, it had a secret copy surreptitiously attached to it.
So it's not breaking the encryption.
No, it's just getting a copy before it's locked, or as it's unlocked. It was, as you said earlier, a continuous, hidden, blind carbon copy on every single conversation.
And the scope was massive. Over 12,000 devices, 300 syndicates in more than 100 countries.
The FBI San Diego office was the hub, just processing this flood of data.
And I remember reading the devices were geofenced, right? They didn't work in the U.S.
A crucial legal safeguard. It kept the operation focused on transnational crime and insulated it from U.S. constitutional challenges about domestic surveillance.
And the intelligence they got, 27 million messages, what did they learn?
The nitty-gritty of global narcotics trafficking. How to hide cocaine in banana boxes, tuna cans, hollowed-out pineapples. They were discussing prices 160,000 Australian dollars for a kilo of coke and coordinating violence, all in what they thought was total privacy.
And the results. Over 800 arrests worldwide. 32 tons of drugs, 250 firearms, $148 million seized.
And again, saving lives. The AFP said they acted on 20 different threats to kill.
So what does this all mean?
It means the entire criminal encrypted market has been fundamentally destabilized. Criminals vouch for ANOM, and that trust is now shattered. Law enforcement proved you don't have to break encryption, you just have to own the platform it runs on. A total game changer.
The success of these stings is, it's incredible, but it brings us back to that core problem. You can't arrest your way out of this. The criminal economy just regenerates too fast.
That's the critical conclusion, particularly from the analysis by the Tony Blair Institute. They argue that our current responses are just too fragmented, too bureaucratic. We're using 20th century tools against 21st century digital networks.
We're failing to hit the enablers, the corruption, the illicit finance.
Exactly. So the TBI paper argues for something systemic, something proactive. And their proposal is the creation of an international serious and organized crime alliance.
So not just another task force.
No, this would be a core group of trusted nations and, crucially, private sector partners, all designed for speed, for trust, and for sustained economic and technical disruption, not just investigations.
And they're drawing inspiration from historical intelligence partnerships, right?
Directly from the Five Eyes Alliance. The US, UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. Five Eyes proves that deep mutual trust and pooled intelligence can work incredibly well.
But there's already a Five Eyes law enforcement group. Why do we need a new alliance just for SOC?
That's an important question. The existing group, it tends to be reactive. It responds to intelligence. This proposed SOC alliance would be designed from the ground up to be proactive and disruptive.
Using that same trust model, but applying it differently.
Applying it to go after the financial and logistical infrastructure of these OCGs, not just the people.
And a core principle seems to be much deeper collaboration with the private sector.
Absolutely essential. The logistics companies move the product, the tech companies provide the platforms, the banks move the money, they own the infrastructure. The alliance says they have to be at the core of the response, not just people you serve a warrant to.
Okay, so what are the big objectives of this alliance?
There are two overriding objectives. The first is to disrupt criminal business models by treating OCGs like failing startups.
I found that analogy really powerful. Most startups fail because they run out of cash or their supply chain breaks.
And the alliance wants to replicate those exact pressures. It means moving away from the slow pace of criminal justice to fast, high-pressure economic tactics.
Which has two parts. The first is increasing costs by using sanctions.
Right. Sanctions are usually a foreign policy tool used against nations. The idea here is to use them rapidly, based on intelligence, to freeze the assets of key OCG facilitators, their shell thugs, their frontmen.
So it's an immediate financial hit.
An immediate, debilitating financial risk. It bypasses the slow process of getting a criminal indictment.
And the second part is cutting the supply line through covert disruption.
This is about taking what we saw with ANOM and making it standard practice. Coordinated, alliance-wide operations to just degrade the reliability and reputation of the entire illicit market.
This is where we get into almost psychological warfare tactics.
The goal is to sow so much mistrust and uncertainty that criminals can't transact with any confidence at all.
What kind of operations are we talking about?
Things like coordinated honey trap operations. Alliance members could run fake listings on darknet markets to harvest data and confuse buyers.
Or controlled delivery stings.
But more than just tracking a shipment, it's about covertly interfering with it, delaying it, altering it, making it useless after it's been paid for. It just destroys the supplier's reputation.
And the most aggressive one, counterfeit product substitution.
Right. Quietly introducing faulty or traceable inputs into their supply chains, like slightly tainted precursors for drug manufacturing. The result is chaos. They have to spend a fortune on quality control, and their costs just explode.
It's brilliant because these networks thrive in a low-trust environment. If they can't even trust their own product, the whole model falls apart.
It shifts the entire operational burden onto the criminal.
Okay, and the second big objective for the alliance?
To deploy technology at pace and scale, creating a shared technological advantage that OCGs simply cannot match.
Because right now, the criminals have the edge.
They do. So the alliance needs to pool its critical infrastructure, its computational power. We're talking about leveraging massive national assets like the UK's AI research supercomputer or France's Genes A supercomputer and making them available for shared cross-border analysis.
So it's about creating a collective capability that's bigger than any one country could manage on its own.
Exactly. pooling resources allows you to do things like coordinated dark web surveillance, real-time crypto tracking across borders, running shared AI models to spot threats.
But that requires overcoming all the old hurdles of data sharing.
It does. Which is why the alliance needs a federated data infrastructure. A system that lets agencies run queries and share intelligence without necessarily handing over all their raw, sensitive data. It improves the threat picture for everyone, dynamically and at speed. The whole strategy is to shift the balance of power back to the state. And that urgency to pool technology, it's driven by the reality that OCGs are already all in on things like AI. There's this asymmetry where criminals innovate faster than law enforcement can even respond.
What are some of the ways criminals are using AI right now?
Well, they're using it to automate and accelerate everything. Automating cyber attacks, mimicking identities for fraud, large-scale social engineering. For example, our sources point to the growth in deepfake-related fraud.
And that growth is huge.
It surged by 1,530% in the Asia-Pacific region, just between 2022 and 2023.
1,500%.
Yeah.
In 1 year. That's exponential.
It is. They're using AI for voice cloning and CEO fraud, generating deep fakes for extortion, creating phishing campaigns at a scale we've never seen before. And law enforcement, as our sources state, is not adequately equipped to prevent, disrupt, or investigate these kinds of crimes.
So if the alliance is the answer, then this idea of joint computational disruption has to be scaled up, using ANOM as the model.
ANOM was the proof of concept. It showed you could do large-scale platform infiltration, capture millions of messages, analyze them, and trigger global action. The Alliance wants to make that standard operating procedure, not a once-in-a-decade special operation.
And we have seen targeted disruption work before, even before ANOM.
Oh, yes. There are several strong precedents. Look at the takedowns of booter services, the platforms that sell denial-of-service attacks.
Right.
The FBI's Xmas 2018 operation seized 15 of these domains right before Christmas. The timing was tactical because that's when young hackers like to test these things out. It immediately disrupted that seasonal spike.
That's a classic supply chain hit. But the darknet market takedowns went even further. They moved into covert takeovers.
Exactly. The best example is Operation Bayonet in 2017. It targeted Alphabet and Hansa Market. Dutch and German police achieved what's called a covert takeover. They didn't just shut the sites down.
They took control of them.
They took control of the infrastructure. And that let them monitor everything in real time. Usernames, passwords, transactions. And then, in a brilliant move, they shut down Alphabet first.
Knowing that all its users would flee to the competition.
Precisely. They channeled all those users directly into Hansa Market, which they now secretly controlled. They let it run for a month, gathered massive intelligence, and then shut it down too. That is the kind of sophisticated disruption the Alliance wants to standardize.
But the ability to actually do this is constrained by the fact that global governance of AI is completely fragmented.
And OCGs are smart. They exploit the gaps. You've got three main models emerging: Europe, the US, and China.
Europe is the regulatory model.
Yes, the AI Act of 2024. It prioritizes rights, bans real-time biometric surveillance.
Yeah.
It's very cautious, which is good for public trust, but the risk is that criminal activity just moves to places with weaker rules.
And the US is the self-regulatory model. Move fast and break things.
Right. It encourages innovation, but the downside is vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
Automated phishing, deepfakes, all that flourishes more easily without strong regulation. It gives OCGs powerful, cheap tools.
And then there's China's authoritarian model.
Centralized control, pervasive surveillance. This limits domestic OCGs, for sure, but it raises huge questions about where crime prevention ends and political repression begins. And their systems are often incompatible with democracies, which complicates cooperation.
So the result is what you'd call criminal forum shopping.
Exactly. OCGs put their crypto wallets, their servers, their AI models, wherever the laws are weakest and cooperation is hardest. This fragmentation is their perfect operating environment.
And that complex legal world brings us to the legal fallout from the ANOM operation itself. The FBI designed it to prosecute people under the U.S. ARCO Act.
The Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act.
For those of us who aren't U.S. lawyers, why is ARCO so important here? Why treat ANOM as a single criminal enterprise?
It was tactically brilliant because RICO lets you treat everyone involved, everyone who bought and used a phone, as part of one giant conspiracy. It's much easier than proving hundreds of separate crimes in different countries.
I see.
The way they distributed the phones through known criminals meant the government could argue that anyone who bought one was probably part of the criminal endeavor.
But in Australia, where Operation Ironside led to so many arrests, the defendants challenged the evidence. They said it was illegally intercepted.
And this hinged on a really technical legal distinction: the difference between a lawful targeted equipment interference (TEI) warrant and an unlawful targeted interception (TI) warrant.
Okay, can you simplify that for us? What's the core of their argument?
They were arguing that the master key, the BCC mechanism, was basically a wiretap. It was an interception of a communication as it was being transmitted, which is governed by very strict laws.
And if it was an illegal interception, the evidence could be thrown out.
Right. The government argued it was lawful equipment interference, like having a warrant to search a computer and copying the data from the device, not intercepting it midair.
So it was a fight over whether the police were acting like wiretappers or like they had a search warrant for a hard drive.
Precisely. And the risk that hundreds of prosecutions could collapse on this technicality was just too high for the government.
Which led to what legal experts called extraordinary legislation.
The Australian government introduced the surveillance legislation, Confirmation of Application Bill 2024. And what this bill does is, well, it's unprecedented. It acts retroactively to clarify that the ANOM evidence was, in fact, lawfully obtained.
It was specifically designed to block those legal challenges.
To secure the evidence. And it just shows how high the stakes are. When you're fighting a multi-trillion-dollar threat with these new digital tools, the legal system sometimes has to move mountains just to keep up.
Which is the big challenge for the proposed alliance. How do you create a legal framework for these powerful techniques that works across multiple countries, all with their own laws and traditions?
The law is struggling to keep pace with the technology, both for the criminals and for the investigators. #tagoutro.
This deep dive has really recalibrated my whole understanding of organized crime. The battlefield has shifted. It's not street corners anymore. It's global supply chains, financial systems, and digital platforms.
And the whole approach has to shift with it. From reactive law enforcement, making arrests after the fact, to proactive systemic disruption, aiming at the business models of these criminal groups.
Which is what the TBI Alliance proposal is all about, treating OCGs like volatile shadow companies.
Exactly. Use economic pressure with sanctions.
Yeah.
Inject chaos into their supply chain, so mistrust. And combine that with overwhelming computational power. The goal is to impose costs that no organization, no matter how decentralized, can possibly sustain over time.
And the success of the ANOM Honeypot, that's definitive proof. Law enforcement can build and run the perfect criminal platform, which means criminals can no longer trust even their most expensive, supposedly secure systems.
It forces them back onto consumer platforms like Signal and WhatsApp, which ironically might make them easier to monitor through more traditional means. But the core challenge, especially with AI now in the mix for both sides, it still remains.
And that challenge is balancing this need for powerful disruption with individual privacy and accountability, especially when the line between a criminal and a state actor is getting so blurry.
The legal moves we just talked about, like Australia's retroactive law, they really highlight that tension. How do you secure vital evidence while still upholding traditional legal principles in this new era of digital warfare?
So we'll leave you with this final thought. The fight against this threat required unprecedented trust among democracies. The FBI, the AFP, Europol, all working together to pull off ANOM.
But the playing field is shifting. Global AI governance is fragmented, which allows for that criminal forum shopping, placing infrastructure where the laws are weakest.
So what happens when the very tools you need to fight transnational crime rely on a level of consensus and trust that's becoming harder and harder for democracies to achieve? The next phase of this war won't be fought just over code. It's going to be fought over governance.